The fork was wrong. Not just a little off. I mean, it was the wrong weight, the wrong balance. I'd eaten at Genetti's enough times to know their forks had a smooth ridge along the handle. This one was flat, dull, like it came from a discount store. I was halfway through mentally drafting a one-star review when I heard it. Her voice. Not loud, not even directed at me, but unmistakable. Alara. I didn't turn right away. I pretended to fuss with my napkin, to shift my glass, just so. I even counted the salt grains I'd spilled on the table, just to buy myself time. My chest felt tight in that petty way it always does when something's not as it should be. Finally, I looked up. 3 tables over, tucked in the shadowy back corner, she was there. My wife. Wearing the green silk blouse she swore she only put on for special occasions. And across from her, a man. Not just any man. His suit was immaculate, but there was a looseness in the way he sat, as if he belonged in every room he entered. He leaned forward, smiling in that easy, practiced way people use when they know they're winning someone over. Her fingers were on the stem of her wine glass, turning it slowly. The candlelight flickered, catching the edge of her wedding ring, until she slid it off and placed it beside her bread plate. That tiny sound, the ring tapping the ceramic, was louder than anything else in the room. I don't remember standing. I just remember walking, the fork still in my hand like some ridiculous silver weapon. And then I was at their table. The candle between them flickered as I stopped at the edge of their table. Neither of them moved at first. Alara's hand froze halfway to her glass, her eyes widening just enough for me to catch it before she masked it with that polite, public smile she uses when she doesn't want to cause a scene. The man leaned back slightly, his head tilting in a way that told me he was sizing me up without even trying. I noticed his cufflinks, silver, with some kind of engraving I couldn't make out, but perfectly aligned. My stomach nodded because I knew I would remember those details longer than I'd remember his face. I set the fork down, not on their table, but carefully on the empty chair beside me. My fingers felt almost too steady, which was strange, because inside, my pulse was hammering. "I think you dropped something," I said, nodding toward the ring on the plate. My voice sounded calm, but there was a crack in it that I hoped neither of them caught. Alara didn't answer right away. She glanced at the man. Quick, almost imperceptible, and that glance told me more than any words could. The man finally spoke, his tone smooth, almost bored. "We were just having lunch." His choice of words, "we," hit harder than I wanted it to. I looked down at the table, one empty appetizer plate between them, 2 half-finished glasses of wine, and a dessert menu open to the tiramisu. It wasn't the food that bothered me. It was the way her napkin was folded neatly on her lap, something she never did at home, as if this meal mattered more than the ones with me. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wedding ring, and placed it beside hers. 2 small circles of metal, side by side, catching the candlelight. For a second, the whole restaurant seemed quieter, like even the clinking of dishes had stopped to listen. Then I turned and walked away, but not toward the door. I headed to the bar, sat down, and ordered a coffee I didn't even want. I needed to think, not about them, but about why the idea of leaving the fork behind was bothering me almost as much as what I'd just seen. From the bar, I could see them in the reflection of the glass, shelves holding bottles of wine and liquor. It wasn't a perfect view. Labels distorted their faces, candlelight flickered across the edges, but I could see enough. Alara was leaning forward now, speaking quickly, her hand making small, sharp gestures like she was explaining something urgent. The man's expression didn't change much. He just nodded occasionally, the way someone does when they already know how the conversation will end. I stirred my coffee even though I hadn't added sugar. The tiny clink of the spoon hitting porcelain was a lifeline, something small and controllable in a room where everything else felt like it was sliding away from me. The bartender, a tall guy with tired eyes, asked if I was waiting for someone. I told him no, though the word felt heavier than it should have. He shrugged and drifted off to polish glasses that were already spotless. My focus stayed on the mirror. I counted the seconds between her smiles. 5, 7, then 12, like measuring the distance between lightning and thunder. Her smiles with me were never spaced like that. They weren't measured at all. They were either absent or instant. This was different. Practiced. Almost strategic. I thought about getting up, walking back to the table, saying something final and cutting. But then the man reached into his coat pocket and slid something small across the table toward her. It was too far for me to see clearly in the reflection, but it caught the candlelight just enough to make my stomach drop. Alara didn't touch it right away. She looked at it, then at him, then at the ring I'd left beside hers. Her hand hovered for a second before she finally drew the object closer and tucked it under the folded napkin in her lap. That was when I realized I'd been holding my breath. I took a sip of coffee to cover it, and that's when I heard them, not through the mirror, but right behind me. A couple at the next set of bar seats were whispering about the woman in the corner and the guy she's with, though their details didn't line up with what I knew. They said words like transfer and meeting before the deadline, and keeping it quiet until Monday. It didn't sound romantic, it sounded like business. But then again, since when did business lunches include sliding something shiny under a napkin? The thought crept in before I could stop it. Maybe I'd walked into the middle of something I didn't understand. And maybe, just maybe, it was worse than what I thought I'd seen. I stayed at the bar longer than I should have, staring into the black surface of the coffee until it went cold. I wasn't drinking it anymore. I was listening. Their voices were faint under the murmur of the other tables, but every now and then, I caught a word or two when the room shifted. Schedule, documents. He doesn't know. Each fragment landed like a nail tapping on glass, steady and deliberate. I told myself I wasn't going to follow them when they left. I told myself 3 times, as if repetition would make it true. But when I saw the man stand up, pulling on that tailored coat, and Alara gathering her things with slow precision, my body moved on its own. They didn't walk out together at first. He went ahead, holding the door for a group of people coming in, and she lingered just long enough to adjust her scarf before stepping outside. I waited until they were both on the sidewalk, then tossed a 20 on the counter and followed. The winter air hit me hard, sharp, with the faint smell of rain on the way. I kept my distance, my footsteps light, the space between us measured so carefully that every time they slowed, I had to pretend to check my phone or look at a store window. They didn't speak much on the street, but their movement said enough. He walked with his hands in his pockets, head turned slightly toward her, like he was giving instructions. She listened, nodding every so often, her face calm in a way that made me uneasy. We moved past a line of parked cars until he stopped beside a dark blue sedan. He opened the passenger door for her, not like a date, but like someone ensuring a package was being delivered safely. She slid in without hesitation. I was close enough to hear the muffled slam of the door. He didn't get in right away. Instead, he leaned in through the driver's side, rummaging for something, then straightened with a small leather case in his hand. It wasn't a purse. It wasn't a briefcase. Too small for one, too stiff for the other. He looked over his shoulder, right past me, though his eyes didn't lock on, and then got into the driver's seat. The car pulled away smoothly, merging into traffic, and I stood there in the cold, my breath hanging in the air like smoke. My first thought was to grab my own car and follow them, but the street was too busy, too unpredictable. And then I noticed something else, something small, but enough to stop me from moving at all. On the curb, right where the sedan had been parked, lay a folded piece of paper with a red wax seal. It wasn't just dropped, it was placed. I didn't touch it. Not yet. I just stared at it, wondering why Alara hadn't picked it up and why I suddenly felt like I was part of something I had no business being in. I crouched down, staring at the paper as if it might vanish if I looked away. The red wax seal wasn't just decorative. It had an emblem pressed into it, something like a crest or insignia, but I couldn't make out the exact design in the dim light. The wax itself was fresh, not brittle, with that faint glossy sheen it gets when it's barely cooled. I glanced up and down the street. No one seemed to be watching, but that didn't make me feel any less exposed. Against my better judgment, I reached for it. The paper was heavier than I expected, almost like parchment, and folded into an exact rectangle without a single wrinkle. Whoever placed it there cared about precision. I slipped it inside my coat pocket before anyone could notice. My fingers stayed pressed to it, as though the feel of the thing might tell me what it was. The street felt colder now, emptier, even though cars still moved past, and people crossed at the far end of the block. I walked toward my own car, forcing my steps to stay casual, though my mind was anything but. Part of me wanted to rip the seal open right there on the sidewalk. Another part, louder, steadier, said that if Alara had left it behind, there was a reason, and finding out that reason might be the only leverage I had left. By the time I got in my car, my hands were trembling. I sat there for a full minute, engine off, watching the condensation form on the inside of the windshield. Finally, I started the car and pulled out, taking a route home that looped unnecessarily through side streets. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced I'd see that dark blue sedan behind me. I didn't. What I did see, halfway through my detour, was a figure in a long coat standing at the corner of 5th and Marlowe, watching traffic. I don't know why my eyes locked on him, but there was something about the way he held himself, like he wasn't waiting to cross, but to see who passed by, that made my grip on the wheel tighten. At home, I didn't go inside immediately. I sat in the driveway with the envelope in my lap, the wax seal catching the glow from the street lamp. I thought about Alara's face at the restaurant, about the way she glanced at that man before speaking, about the object he'd slid to her, and the way she'd tucked it away. It all felt connected to the weight of the paper in my hands. When I finally broke the seal, the wax crumbled in a neat line, as though it had been made to be opened only once. Inside was a single sheet, folded twice, with handwriting so clean it could have been printed. There were only 7 words. Do not let him know the truth. I read it twice, 3 times. I wasn't sure which part one hated more, that Alara was clearly involved in something she hadn't told me about, or that him could very well be me. And for the first time that day, I wasn't sure I wanted the truth at all. I sat there with the note in my hands, staring at the words until they stopped looking like words and started looking like marks carved into my life. The handwriting was precise, almost unervingly so, with the kind of consistency you'd expect from someone trained to write neatly for a living. It wasn't Alara's handwriting. I knew hers well enough. Small, hurried loops, half the letters barely formed. This was deliberate, careful, and yet there was something about the slant, the slight curve at the end of the T, in truth, that tugged at a memory I couldn't quite place. It was like hearing a voice you're sure you've heard before, but can't remember where. I kept the paper flat on my lap, resisting the urge to crumple it or toss it away. Instead, I turned it over, checking for watermarks, imprints, anything. There was nothing except the faintest smudge of what looked like graphite near the corner. Maybe from a pencil, maybe not. My eyes kept darting to the driveway behind me, half expecting a car to pull in, headlights sweeping over me. I decided I couldn't just sit there. I needed a neutral space, somewhere I could think without the walls of my house pressing in on me. So I drove to the all-night diner on Brighton Street, the one where the waitresses know how to keep coffee hot and questions to themselves. The parking lot was mostly empty, which suited me fine. I took a booth in the back, the kind where you can see the whole room, but no one notices you unless they're looking for you. The note sat on the table between the sugar shaker and the napkin dispenser. I kept glancing at the door, imagining Alara walking in, sliding into the booth like nothing had happened, asking why I'd left the restaurant without a word. But the door stayed closed, and the only people who came in were 2 construction workers and a woman in a red coat, who left with her order before her coffee had even cooled. It wasn't until my second cup of coffee that I noticed him. A man, alone, 3 booths ahead of me, pretending to read a menu he clearly already knew by heart. He hadn't ordered. He hadn't moved much at all. But when I caught the reflection of his face in the chrome trim on the counter, I recognized him. He was the one standing at 5th and Marlowe earlier, the one watching traffic like he was waiting for something specific. And now, apparently, that something was me. I slid the note back into my pocket, leaving the empty coffee cup as my only trace, and headed for the side exit near the restrooms. I didn't look back until I was outside, and when I did, he was no longer at the booth. The door swung open behind me, and I felt that cold rush of air on the back of my neck as someone stepped out. Whoever wrote that note hadn't just known about Alara. They'd known I'd find it. And now I was starting to think they'd known exactly what I would do next. The side alley was narrow, with brick walls on either side that seemed to lean inward, funneling the cold air straight through me. My footsteps echoed too loudly, and every instinct I had was telling me to keep walking, not to stop, not to give whoever was behind me the satisfaction of knowing they'd rattled me. But halfway down, I saw it. Under the dim orange glow of a street lamp, there was another folded piece of paper. No wax seal this time, just a plain fold, weighted down by a quarter. My pulse quickened in that same tight, almost painful way it had back at the restaurant. I didn't pick it up immediately. Instead, I scanned the shadows, but the only movement was the jitter of a broken light farther down the block. Slowly, I bent and took it. The paper was warm, as though it had been held just moments ago. When I unfolded it, my stomach sank. This time, the handwriting wasn't the careful print from before. It was rushed, uneven, like it had been written standing up. The words were fewer, sharper. She's not lying to you. But she will. A noise behind me made me turn. The man from the diner stood at the far end of the alley, his hands in his coat pockets. He didn't move closer, just tilted his head like he was studying a specimen. You shouldn't follow her anymore, he said, his voice carrying easily through the cold. It wasn't a threat exactly, but there was something in the way he said it that made my skin prickle. I took a step toward him. Who are you? That's not the right question, he replied. You should be asking who's following you. He smiled faintly, then glanced past me, toward the street I'd come from. I turned reflexively, and when I looked back, he was gone. The alley was empty, except for the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. Back at my car, I locked the doors and sat there, staring at the two notes on the passenger seat. My mind kept circling the phrasing. She's not lying, but she will. And it felt like someone was playing with the timing of my life, like they already knew the exact moment it would all collapse. I considered calling Alara, demanding answers, but part of me was terrified of confirming whatever these messages were hinting at. Instead, I started the engine and drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring past, until I found myself outside the building where Alara worked. It was late. Most of the windows were dark, but on the third floor, one square of light burned steady. And there, silhouetted against the glass, was Alara, speaking to someone just out of view, her hands moving in that same deliberate way I'd seen at the restaurant. It was then I realized something I hadn't let myself consider all day. Maybe this wasn't about betrayal in the way I thought. Maybe whatever she was part of was big enough that the betrayal hadn't even started yet. I sat in my car outside her office, watching that single-lit window like it was the last piece of a puzzle I didn't know how to finish. The longer I stared, the more my mind ran wild. Until finally, I told myself enough was enough. I got out, the night air snapping against my face, and walked toward the building before my courage had the chance to crumble. The lobby guard barely glanced at me when I said Alara's name. Maybe it was the way I said it, too certain, too determined, but he waved me through. When I reached the third floor, the hallway was quiet except for the hum of the heating vents. Her office door was ajar, and I could hear voices, hers, low and steady, and a man's, calm but firm. I pushed the door gently, and both of them turned toward me. The man was not the one from the restaurant. He was older, hair silver at the temples, wearing a badge clipped to his belt. On the desk between them was the small leather case I'd seen earlier, open to reveal neatly arranged stacks of documents and a phone I didn't recognize. Alara stood, her expression flickering between surprise and relief. "Lowell," she said, crossing the room quickly. "I was going to tell you tonight." The man nodded toward me. "You must be her husband. I'm with the state attorney's office." It took a moment for the words to sink in. Alara explained in quick bursts. The man at the restaurant was an undercover investigator. She'd been helping him gather evidence on a company executive involved in serious fraud, and the object he'd passed her wasn't jewelry or something personal. It was a secure drive containing the last piece of proof they needed. The notes? She didn't know about those, but she guessed they were from someone trying to spook her into backing out. I wanted to be angry that she hadn't told me, but looking at her, steady, focused, unshaken, I realized this wasn't about not trusting me. It was about keeping me out of something dangerous. For once, my obsessive attention to detail had put me in the middle of a story I never should have been part of, and she'd been carrying it alone to protect me. When we left the building together, the city air didn't feel so cold anymore. We walked to the car in silence, her hand slipping into mine without hesitation. The notes were still in my pocket, but they felt lighter now, almost meaningless. Somewhere behind us, a street lamp flickered, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a figure in a coat watching us from across the street. But this time, I didn't care. I'd spent the whole day thinking our marriage had been knocked off balance, when in reality, it had been steadier than I gave it credit for. As we drove home, Alara leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to notice every little thing that might be wrong. "Tonight," There was nothing wrong at all.